When you're racing wheel to wheel, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. And I can think about 100 different things I could have worked on. But as we know, that's not the best approach. So you come back to the trailer, you focus on the fundamentals. What's one thing I can work on? And you go and attack it in the next session.
You're listening to DriveSport, the amateur track driver podcast. Here's your host, DMC.
Hello and welcome to DriveSport. This is the show where we teach you how to get your car on track, drive safe, have fun, and get your car home in one piece. And my guest today is someone I've been really excited to have on the show because he's someone that I've hired several times to coach me through the simulator. I got to know him through Suelio Almeida's academy. So we've gotten to know each other, and he's taught me a lot and helped me know that I have a lot to learn. My guest today is Connor Bell. Connor, how are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me on the show, Dave.
Yeah, I'm honored to have you here. And so you are not just a sim coach. You also have a lot of success in real life racing as well. You race for the NASCAR Canada Series. You've won one of those series, correct?
Yeah. So just this past summer in 2025, made my first start in the NASCAR Canada Series and won on debut. So it's been a good ride so far.
Oh, that's amazing, man. To do that the first time out, that's fantastic. And how long have you been coaching?
So I'd say it's been around 2 years now. So started 2 years ago with Suelio, actually. My first ever coaching session was under the Almeida Racing Academy. And sort of at the same time, I was also getting into real life coaching. So it definitely came on pretty quick, but gotten to be super passionate about it, and can't wait to share some of that expertise here today.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Before we do that, I want to talk a little bit because I think people are really fascinated about this, especially because, you know, when there are movies like Gran Turismo that come out, the idea of, wow, going from sitting in front of a computer with a steering wheel to, you know, getting strapped in with a harness in real life in a car. How did you make that transition?
Yeah, it all started right before COVID, I would say. I had gotten out of karting. You know, I did a little bit of local karting, nothing too serious, nothing super competitive. And once COVID hit, I was bored, sitting at home, not at school, not hanging out with, you know, people because we weren't allowed, especially here in Canada. And so got myself a simulator and kept wanting more and more and kept feeding off of that competition in the sim. And then decided to pick up a spec Miata in real life and sort of continued to develop that way, kept going up to faster and faster cars until now I sort of reached my bucket list series, which was the NASCAR Canada Series.
Okay, so a couple of questions come to mind from that. First of all, what app were you using primarily when you started sim driving?
Yeah, I've always been someone who's been on iRacing. I started on iRacing. I've done all of my development as a driver on iRacing. You know, occasionally I'll use Assetto Corsa if iRacing doesn't have the track or the car that I want to practice with. But I find that iRacing is the most realistic and competitive sim out there.
I think that's important too, because when someone is thinking about it, they don't quite know there are a lot of different pathways you can take, a lot of different games you can use. I primarily use iRacing, but I think it's worth saying, you know, you mentioned Assetto Corsa, and I want to point out too that it's not Assetto Corsa Competizione, right? Which is more of like self-contained, in a box, you're racing GT3s, which is a fantastic game. But Assetto Corsa has massive modification, right? It gives you options to do pretty much any track. So that's why you mentioned that that's what you use, correct?
Yeah, so it's almost like a sandbox, the original Assetto Corsa. There's thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of mods out there online. And what I ended up getting into, especially when practicing for the first NASCAR race, was actually developing my own car model. So trying to make it feel more like the real thing. And it got so accurate that I was actually testing gearing and setup changes for the real team because they were going to a track the series had never been to before. So that was really interesting.
Oh, that's really cool. And then the other question that I had was, why Miata? I know the answer, but why did you start with Miata?
I think a couple different reasons. One, it honestly is the perfect car for development. It's the perfect first step. It's not too fast to the point where you can get into serious trouble or scare yourself. But at the same time, it's ultra competitive. So there's even at my local track, there's 25, 30 cars that are identical. And you basically get to race people no matter what level of your development you're at. So when I was first starting out, I still had people to fight with. And then as I got better and better and continued to develop, there was still people I could battle with. So I think those two reasons are the biggest in terms of why the MX-5 is the best development car.
Yeah, it is so easy to get into. The cost, relatively speaking, of something bad happening is not as high as, say, I track a GT4, Porsche GT4. There's a lot of cost associated with that, but I'm also not racing. I'm not going wheel to wheel with anybody. So yeah, that's a wonderful choice. And it's a very popular car at the track. If you're thinking, hey, maybe I'm going to take that next step, that's a good thing to consider. Okay, so you started to get into it. What was the point at which it started to become, would you consider yourself professional, semi-professional? What is the level, the terminology that you would use?
I think starting to get into that professional stage, I would say it is the NASCAR Canada Series is sort of the premier series in the country. So I'd say, yeah, starting to work into the professional category, you could say.
So that means that you have to go out and get sponsors, right? It's not that you just get to show up and drive the car. You also have to locate the money to drive that car as well.
For sure. Yeah, that's been a big part of the last, I'll say, year. Everyone thinks being a racing driver is just the on-track stuff and maybe the physical preparation beforehand. But I'd say that's probably a maximum of 10% of the job. It's all the preparations, the year before, trying to generate sponsorship, trying to deliver on what you can offer to these companies. So it's a lot of work, but it's part of the job, and I enjoy that part as well.
Yeah, well, that's good that you enjoy it, because it really is. I mean, if you're going to race, now you're also in social media suddenly, right? Because you've got to post up about your sponsors. You got to keep people excited. So that is a big part of the commitment to that. So that's wonderful that you love it, because I have met other guys who are in the sport and they don't enjoy that aspect, but unfortunately it's just part of the job. And by the way, since we're on that, just a shout out to your Instagram page. That's connorbell.racing, correct? On Instagram, what other places do you want people to follow you?
Yeah, Instagram's certainly a good place to keep updated with what I got going on, and then also the YouTube for sure. So that's just Connor Bell, ConnorBell. I've got lots of coaching content on there, and definitely a good place to get lots of free content.
Yeah, so let's use that as the spot to start talking about the coaching. I did look at one of those YouTube videos just before we went into this. And of course, I have hired you. We've done, I think, 3 live sessions together, and it's definitely helped me. I saw the impact on real life driving on the track last season. This season, I'm waiting to get out on the track. They're being a little slow right now. So let's talk about that for a second and put ourselves in the shoes of someone who's listening to this. They're going out to the track. They're doing high performance driving education, HPDE. What is a sign when you start coaching someone that you know they're going to make progress quickly compared to someone that you think they're going to get coaching from you, but I can already see that they're going to struggle with it? What's the difference between the two? And we'll be right back. Track days are fun, but also unpredictable. That's part of the thrill. When the unexpected and expensive lesson happens, you'll be glad your car is protected by Open Track Insurance, found at drivesport.co/insurance. Open Track offers full vehicle coverage and liability insurance, something you just don't find with most track day policies. And if you're a true track rat like me, they even offer annual coverage, so you're protected at every event throughout the year. It's a great deal. Get a quote today at drivesport.co/insurance. You can drive safer, be more confident, and have more fun knowing your car is protected by Open Track. Visit drivesport.co/insurance.
I think being open to learning, there's 2 very different people I'd say I encounter when coaching. There's someone who's really open, wants to learn new things and apply it to their driving. And then some people, not that they're not wanting to learn, but it's they've developed these skills over the years or months of their driving career, and it's the battle of trying to eliminate bad habits and kind of being stuck between, the new content that we're trying to learn and the old things they might have developed over the course of their driving career. So I'd say that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah. You got to be able to say, hey, there's always something here to learn, and I am open to it. And I think there are different levels here, right? I go to the track, I coach at the track, and they're the people that are like, I don't want coaching. they just shut down the conversation. They just want to go out and drive. And I think, well, okay, whatever level you're at right now, you're going to be at that level for a good long time, if not always. Then there are the ones who are like, I want coaching, and they're good for it for like a session or two. And then like, I want to drive on my own. And I always think, man, unless you're George Russell, Max Verstappen, any of these, you still have things to learn. And even they have still things to learn. So the other camp that I think is the best is the ones who are always looking for coaching and always want it. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm sure you love to receive coaching, even though you're a very accomplished coach yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I still get coaching up to this day. I've got a couple people within the Almeida Racing Academy, our coaches. We all sort of feed off of each other. And so there's never a point in your driving career where you're too developed or too fast to not need coaching. So like you mentioned, Max Verstappen, all these guys have engineers, and there's a reason why these people are still on the F1 teams, is because everyone needs coaching.
Yeah. And that's just a principle of success in life too. In my other job, I'm an executive coach. I'm a trainer. And the most successful people that I know are most open to receiving that kind of coaching. So I think we've preached that. Now let's say that I'm in the car or I'm in the sim and I'm with you. What are some mental approaches I can take to put myself in a place where I can get the greatest benefit from that coaching?
Yeah, I honestly think that part all starts with the coach. I think as long as you're open to what the coach is telling you, that's already the first step, as we mentioned. But beyond that, as a coach, like we mentioned in our last session, actually, it's all about the fundamentals. So if you as a coach are trying to teach your student 4 different things at once, it's just not going to work, as I'm sure you know from your other career as well. And so I think focusing on the absolute fundamentals, one thing, it's sort of the principle of less is more, right? The less things you coach probably means they're going to be more important, and then that's going to be easier to apply for the student. So I would say that's the biggest thing there.
As a coach, you have to show restraint, because especially with someone like you who knows so much about the sport, you sit down with someone like me and you're like, there's 20 things I see right now you're not doing right. But the question is, which one, maybe 2 of those things are most valuable? And I think there's a responsibility there on the student's part too, to recognize that I cannot improve everything at the same time. I'm not going to get a perfect lap if this is my 4th time out at the track or whatever. All I'm going to do is I'm going to learn a skill, and I want to get better at that skill than I was before.
Certainly, yeah. I think one of the traps students fall into as well is going online and seeing how much information is out there. Whether it's YouTube videos or blog posts or forums or courses, there's so much to learn. And I think it's very easy to try and watch 20 different videos and try and apply the 20 different things in your driving, as you mentioned. But again, unfortunately, while it sounds great, it doesn't really work. So you sort of have to restrain yourself, like you mentioned, as the student, and really focus on just going one by one, letting the skill develop. And then once you have that down, then you can move on to something else.
Yeah. And there's a principle here that I'm sure you teach. I've heard Suelio say it, and it's, are you driving the line or driving the car? And I think so many people are so concerned about the line when they get in. But what you really want to do is drive the car. Could you describe the difference between those 2 things for us?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's sort of the basis of my coaching philosophy. So driving the line, the very classic way of coaching drivers is to, use all of the track, get right to the apex, track out all the way. And I understand why. It's going to make the corner easier to navigate. In the end, once we have all the baseline skills built up, it's certainly going to help pace-wise. But driving the car is more important because that means you're essentially driving the tires closer to the limit of grip. So to put it into perspective, driver A could drive the line at 10 kilometers an hour. And even though he's driving the perfect racing line, he's never going to be as fast as the driver that's driving to the limit of the tires on the wet racing line. So driving the car and the tires is way more important. And I think that's what I typically focus on in my coaching sessions. It's starting with the absolute basics. How do we feel what it means to drive the car? And how can we apply this to the different portions of the corner?
Yeah. And I would use a term, learning the car. I think of it as a conversation. When I get in someone's car new for the first time, or even in the sim, right? You can do this an infinite number of times where you have all these different cars in iRacing or whatever. It's not like I can say every car is the same. I'm going to drive every car the same. That's not it. I have to have a conversation with the car. I have to say, where can you brake? And the car goes, well, I can brake here if you do this. How much can you turn in? How much oversteer do you have, right? And Connor, I always like to take some terms that we understand very clearly. Like oversteer is when you turn it and the car turns more than you expected, or understeer and you turn it and it turns less than you expected. Every car is going to have a different set of things that it likes to do and doesn't like to do. And you need to take the time to get to know that. And just driving the line isn't going to get you there.
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, it's a conversation with the car. It's giving it some input and feeling what the output is. Like we've focused on in past, I think we want to try and feel the limits of the car in the safest way possible. You know, people hear the word limit or feeling the grip of the tires, and they think it's a scary or dangerous thing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You know, we got to think about what part of the corner is the safest portion to start working up to, again, driving the car, feeling the car, connecting to the car. And there's parts of the corner where that's easier. The straight line braking phase is one of those parts of the corner where we can start to get comfortable with the feedback that the car is giving us. And I think slowly working your way up is the best way to go about it, because you definitely don't want to knock your confidence.
Yeah. And I love too that you're talking a lot about the tires. I think that's an aspect of it that when I first started, I had no idea about tires. I didn't know anything about them. And the more I do this, the more I go, wow, it's all about the tires. It's very, very important to understand how well they're inflated, what's the temperature, all of those things. And that gets into something that you teach in particular that I've experienced with you and had not heard before, which is the importance of sound and using sound as a reference point. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is and why you do that?
Yeah. So for those listening that run on a simulator to practice for real life, you've probably experienced the extra level of difficulty where we basically don't have the G-forces that we have in real life. You know, when we're in a real car, everyone talks about the seat of the pants feel, and that's just something we don't get on the simulator. So what we got to think about is, well, how can we substitute the lack of feeling that we're getting, or I guess not receiving in the simulator? And so one of the best ways to do that, especially in iRacing, is through the sounds that the tires are producing. It's not necessarily something we're going to be able to directly translate over to real life, but what it is going to help us with is developing the processes of working up to the limit. And we're simply just going to be using a different delivery method of how we're feeling the car in real life, which, as I mentioned, is going to be the G-force and that seat of the pants feel.
Now, the question comes to mind, because you're saying in the simulator, that's what we have to use. But isn't that still useful in real life as well, of getting used to the sound of the car?
Certainly. Yeah, there are some instances in real life where you can use the sound as well. I would say typically you're going to get, lots of screeching from the tires in real life when we're over the limit of the tire. So it can be a way to, start feeling where we're over the limit and maybe understeering and then dial down from there. So there are some uses that way, but typically in real life, you won't get much tire sounds when we're at the limit. So it's not as useful, I would say.
And just give us one trick for those who are both trying to learn in the sim and drive in real life. Can you get into the specifics of how someone can become more sensitive to sound? So I'm learning a new track. I'm trying to figure out how to corner properly. I'm trying to figure out how to brake properly. What can I do to start using sound for that?
Yeah, so I would say when you're running in iRacing, I like popping out to the audio settings and actually lowering the engine sounds. That way the differential between engine and tire sounds is bigger. It's a bigger delta, so naturally you're going to be able to hear those tire sounds a little bit better. And then all you're going to look to do is basically start experimenting with braking pressures. And once you feel you're at the limit of the tires, just under a lockup or under ABS, you can connect that to the pitch of tire sound that the car is producing. And that's sort of going to be your cue to base your braking off of as you continue progressing. So if we want to talk about, how we can translate that over to real life, it would be the exact same process, except when we feel we're at the limit, we're going to connect that to the sense of G-force or the sense of pedal force. And we're just going to look to replicate that every time we go around that corner or every braking zone around the track. So really, I guess my coaching style is to get feeling, right? A lot of people will look at telemetry and they'll say, okay, this driver is braking to 50 bar in this corner. I need to try and replicate this as much as possible. But if you don't have the baseline skills built up, and if you're just trying to copy other drivers, it unfortunately, 99% of the time doesn't work. So it's like, how can we work ourselves up to our comfortable limit and develop a feeling that we can work off of? That way we can consistently achieve that lap after lap, corner after corner.
Yeah, boy, that's such an important thing of looking at who you're looking at when you're trying to get a reference of how to drive. And in fact, that's something that I'm working on, is creating instructor laps for example, Utah Motorsports Camp, which is my home track. People go and look and they'll see someone has posted Utah Motorsports Campus, West Lap, Mustang, right? And they show it. But what it doesn't account for is that this person is in a wheel-to-wheel race, or that this person has 5 to 6 years of experience. And we're trying to replicate their lap. And that's not what we should do if we're new. We need to first understand just what a nice, clean, good, solid lap is. And then we can start building from that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy to get in that trap as a newer driver. There's thousands of onboard laps on YouTube. You can pull up telemetry from other drivers, and like you mentioned, it's a whole collection of skills that the driver has used to get to that point where they're braking that late, where they're achieving those lap times. And like we mentioned before, if we just try and copy that, it's typically going to end in an unsafe environment. And I think that's the most important part to highlight. We don't want to put ourselves in situations where we're not being safe, not only because that could damage the car and put you in a dangerous situation, but it could also knock your confidence as well. And I've seen that happen before, where drivers will try and go too fast, too early. They'll knock their confidence, and then it's very hard to regain that. So it's important to take small steps and build those baseline skills first.
Oh, that's such an important principle. One of the things part of it, I picked it up from Ross Bentley in his training of how to train instructors. I kind of added my own little thing to it, but there does need to be this balance, like a three-legged stool, between the ability of the car, the confidence of the driver, and the skill of the driver. All three of those things need to be aligned. And if they have way more confidence than they have skill, we've got a problem, right? But on the other side, if their confidence is just hammered down, like you said, they will lose interest in it and they'll feel like they can't succeed. So how do you, Connor, as a coach, manage that balance between those things?
Yeah, I think part of it is setting expectations. The student needs to know that they're not going to set Max Verstappen level lap times right away. So it's not setting that expectation at first. I think sometimes it's important to highlight that, we're just looking to get the feeling down first, or we're just looking to improve this portion of the corner for now. And, you sort of give them the idea that, later on we'll be able to look for pace. Right now it's just developing or improving the skill we're currently working on.
This brings up a question, which is, and I don't know if you've thought about it or if you have a way to do it, but how to measure your skills development. And the quick, easy answer is, well, it's just the time. But if we're looking at individually the skill of braking, the skill of cornering, all those things. How do I start to know whether or not I'm actually improving or whether I'm just doing the same thing over and over?
That's a good question. I think, lap times are not always the best representation. Certainly you can look at consistency. Am I able to string lap times that are closer together in general? And then also looking at, your corner structure. Like, have you improved your braking so much where now we're over slowing for the corner, or we feel the need to move our braking point later? So generally corner structure stuff will be a good sign that we've developed or improved a certain skill in terms of braking or rotation phases of the corner. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the main things.
For the uninitiated, what are the phases of a corner?
I would say I divide it into 4 phases. You've got your straight line braking phase. This is simply when we're braking with our wheel completely straight, and the only goal there is to slow the car down as efficiently as possible. The second phase is going to be the initial turn-in. So this is when we're transitioning from slowing down the car to turning it into the apex. The third phase is what I'll call the mid-corner phase. This is as we're approaching the apex and getting our last little bits of rotation done. And then I just have exit as one portion of the corner. And the reason why I don't have the exit divided into multiple sections is because it should be the easiest portion of the corner as long as you've done everything right before the apex.
Okay, so the 4 phases: straight line braking, the turn-in, mid-corner, and the exit. Which one do new drivers tend to struggle with the most?
Struggle with the most, I would say, if you're a really new driver, straight line braking. Not because it's a super difficult portion of the corner, but because it can lead to a lot of inconsistency. Drivers, I find, won't have a certain feel that they're targeting in terms of how hard they should brake under the straight line braking phase. Sometimes they might brake a little too light and they won't get enough deceleration done, and then they run into issues mid-corner where they're carrying too much speed. And then they might brake too hard where they're either getting into ABS or locking up the tires in a non-ABS car. So I'd say that's always the first portion of the corner I like to work on, just because it helps develop consistency. And then once we have that down, we can start getting more advanced with the rotation phases of the corner.
Yeah, and since you brought up ABS, should we be getting into the anti-lock brake system or should we not be getting into that? Let's say if I'm driving a typical GT car.
I would say it depends slightly on the car. If you're in a super high-end like spec race car, a Porsche Cup car or something like that, you probably can use a little bit of ABS because it's meant to do that. But in most cars, especially street cars and even on the simulator, we typically want to avoid ABS. The reason why is because anytime we do get into ABS, we're most likely going to put the front tires over their grip limit. And that's actually going to lead to less deceleration, inconsistency in terms of our speed control, and we're not going to have much front tire left for the turning phases of the corner.
So best to get just under that, the threshold.
Exactly.
What's something else that you like to focus on when you're, in particular, coaching someone who is either on the real life track or they're getting ready to go onto a real life track?
Yeah, great question. I think it's developing your processes for finding the limits. So that's personally, I think, the most important thing when a driver is using the simulator to practice for real life. It's not, remembering references and using the exact same ones in real life. It's not expecting the exact same amount of grip. It's not, taking the exact same lines in real life. The simulator is best for developing your processes to find the limit. And the reason why that's important is because, one, you get to work on, developing the safety portion of slowly working up to finding pace in real life. And you get to prepare that process on the sim beforehand. And then also you get to be more efficient with your time in real life. As I'm sure everyone knows listening to this, track time is not only super expensive, but it's very limited, right? We don't get 6 hours a day to run laps, oftentimes not. And so it's how do we be the most efficient with our time and as safe as possible.
Yeah, that's the one massive advantage that using a sim to prep has is just the sheer reps. And especially in iRacing, I don't know if Assetto Corsa has this. I know ACC does not, but the ability to mark a reference and then just hit that corner over and over and over 50 times in the space of a half an hour. Can you talk about why we do that? Why we mark a spot and then we just practice that corner over and over?
Yeah, I think it allows us to isolate certain techniques that we're working on. So let's say if you just wanted to focus on improving your straight line braking, we can set a reference before a corner that has a really long straight line braking phase. And it just gives us more of an opportunity to isolate a certain technique and practice it more times within that certain period of time. So, if you were going for full laps and you didn't have the active reset point set, you would spend probably, 10 times the amount of time to work on the same exercise.
Okay, just shifting gears a little bit. What's something that you've learned from competing in real life that you didn't recognize or understand before when you first started going out on the track?
I would say it's the mental game. When you're racing wheel to wheel, even if you're, running time attack or trying to go for fast laps, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. And it really comes down to coming back to the fundamentals, like we spoke about. And so from the mental side, I've had experiences in real life where I'm a second off pace in qualifying, and I can think about 100 different things I could have worked on. But as we know, that's not the best approach. So you come back to the trailer, you focus on the fundamentals. What's one thing I can work on? What's two things I can work on? And you go and attack it in the next session.
Yeah. There's just too many inputs to try to think of anything more than that anyway. What's a trick that you use to, I don't know if calm yourself down is the right word, or get yourself in the right mindset so that in the midst of stress, it doesn't overwhelm you? And I'm saying this to compare, I'm thinking about my audience, of someone who's just like getting into passing for the first time. They have to pass someone on track or someone's passing them, which the first time it happens is very stressful. What's something that they could borrow from what you do in racing that can get them in a spot where they can do it and not feel stress when they're doing it?
I think it all comes down to making sure your body is relaxed. In these high stress moments, it's very easy as a driver to literally death grip the steering wheel, hold your breath. I've experienced that before where I literally realize I'm not breathing. And so it all starts with relaxing your hands on the steering wheel. That's going to calm your whole body. It's going to let you feel the car better. And just taking deep breaths, make sure we're calm and not strangling the car, because once we're strangling the car, we can't feel anything. And then we lose our baseline that we started working from in the first place.
Yeah, that's so important. I hope everyone was paying attention to that. Relax your hands. So this has been super useful, Connor, and I really appreciate this. Can you talk to us about, I know there's one sponsor in particular. I know you've got some awesome sponsors, but you've got one that does some philanthropic stuff, and you'd like to talk about them. Could you share that just briefly?
Yeah, so my title sponsor from last year and actually moving into the 2026 season is the Diamond Foundation. The Diamond Foundation, like you mentioned, is a philanthropic initiative here based locally in Ontario, Canada. And what I'm essentially doing throughout my racing season is helping raise awareness for the change and, the efforts they're making in our local community. Their primary focus is supporting local charities such as the Ottawa Mission. So basically helping homelessness, giving people a place to sleep, education, and so on. And then also the Ottawa Heart Institute. And so they've been a big player in my community. And I just wanted to shout them out for all the work they've been doing.
Fantastic. And I'm going to ask you some wrap-up questions, some quick-fire questions at the end. But let's just recap again where they should go if they want to follow you, and also if they want to hire you like I've done for coaching.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at connorbell.racing. On YouTube, it is just Connor Bell. And then if you're looking to hire me as a coach, you can go to the almeidaracingacademy.com website, go to the coaching page, and you will see my booking link there.
Okay, fantastic. So now what I do with all of my guests, Connor, I ask a pit stop question. that just gets us to pause and think for a moment. And then I'm going to ask some hot lap questions that are just kind of rapid fire at the end. Sound good?
Awesome. Sounds good.
So the pit stop question I ask everyone is, what's the most expensive lesson you've learned while driving at the track?
Ooh, I would say pushing too hard too early. I had an experience where I'd been running my first radical race. It was unfortunately on a street circuit when it was raining. That was my first ever race in a radical.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
And I got a little bit overwhelmed and started, pushing for a podium. Sent it a little too hard into a corner and took the rear wing off the car. So that was definitely a lesson I had to learn. And again, comes back to our conversations of, earlier, where we got to slowly work up to the limit because, if you're not finishing the race, you're certainly not finishing on the podium. So
Yeah. There's no sense in pushing if you don't know where you are, if you don't know the track. All right. Hot lap questions. What's your favorite car that you've driven?
Oh, it's got to be the NASCAR Canada Series car. Super high horsepower, spinning the tires in pretty much every gear. It's quite the thrill to drive.
Amazing. And you get to do that on a regular basis. Bucket list car you haven't driven yet?
Ooh, I would say probably a mid-level Formula car. I was always a super big fan of the Formula 3 on iRacing, and I think it's just the perfect balance of downforce to power.
Well, there's still plenty of time, right? Still could happen, right? Favorite track to drive in real life, and then favorite track to drive on a sim?
I'd say it probably has to be Canadian Tire Motorsports Park here just outside of Toronto, Ontario. All blind corners, super sketchy, and you really got to be brave to find those last few tenths. And then I'd say track I'd like to drive would probably have to be Bathurst. I find it such a joy to drive on the sim. The walls are close, there's lots of elevation change, and you really got to send it to find the last little bits of time as well.
I love that your choice on both of those are ones where there's high risk involved. That's a race driver mentality for sure. I think I know the answer to this already, but what's your most proud track driving accomplishment?
Yeah, it would probably have to be the NASCAR Canada Series debut race, but hopefully we can have a bigger moment this season.
Yeah, amazing. Best piece of driving advice you ever received from someone else?
Ooh, good question. So I had a coach myself around a year ago, and what he said is, it's just the limit, bro. And honestly, that was some of the best advice I've gotten. And in that first NASCAR Canada Series race, we were talking about being mentally overwhelmed at a certain part of the race. I got a pit road speeding penalty and got sent to the back of the field. I was getting roughed around coming through the field and wasn't driving very well. I was spinning the rear tires in some spots. Literally, what I said out loud in the car is, it's just the limit of the tires. And mentally, that put me back into the state where I'm feeling what the car is doing and coming back to the basics of how I'm approaching driving the tires and driving the car. And so I think, although it sounds simple, it's probably the best advice I've gotten.
Yeah, you have to respect that limit. You can't go any more than it. And trying to go more than it is going to make you slower. That's great. And then last thing, what's one thing you want every amateur driver who's listening to this podcast to do?
Ooh, honestly, I'll have to say getting a simulator and actually using it. So I had a portion of my real life racing career where I neglected the simulator for probably a year. And that was the worst real life racing season I've had to date. And honestly, I think the reason for that is not using the simulator, not using it before weekends to prep for the track I'm racing on. And also, it's just going to keep you sharp in general. So get a simulator if you don't have one. If you have one, use it regularly, and you're going to see the benefits pay off the next track day you have.
Yeah, more and more I've done this, the more I understand that there is a synergy between driving on the sim and driving in real life. Both help each other out. So I love that advice. And Connor, I've really enjoyed this interview with you. It's been a pleasure to get to know you in coaching and get you to know you a little bit more here in this interview. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. It was a pleasure on my end as well, and we'll talk soon.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, you can send that to show@drivesport.co. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find an answer to it. And also tell me who you want to hear from and send your guest suggestions. You can send all those to show@drivesport.co. Thanks for listening. Eyes up. Stay fluid.
You've been listening to DriveSport, the amateur track driver podcast, hosted by DMC and produced by DriveSport LLC. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bidez. Music is by Illigot via Premium Beat Licensing. If you have a question, guest suggestion, or a track DMC should visit, please send it to show@drivesport.co. Please subscribe to DriveSport on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And follow us on social media @DriveSport Co. We'll see you in the next episode.